Adventure Underground.
Hi, I'm Rodney Strong.
Hi, my name's Kayla McFarland.
And I'm William Southern. Today we're learning about gypsum from paleontologist and geologist Alan Goldstein. And today we're going in B&O Cave.
Kayla will volunteer for that.
When entering the cave, we discovered artifacts left by bat biologists sponsored by a TV show 2020. They were filming an episode about white-nose syndrome.
Everywhere. You just can see it in this cave, but that pattern and those fractures are everywhere, and that's the water. Percolate through.
Each member of our team enjoyed something different. Now, time to get back to the task at hand, all about gypsum.
My name is Alan Goldstein. I'm a naturalist by profession and a geologist by training and a caver by avocation. And we are in B&O Cave, which is a gated cave, gated to protect Indiana bats, endangered species. And this cave is a winter hibernaculum, which basically means that the bats hibernate in this cave sometime in the fall through the spring. So the cave is only accessible by invitation only, and even that's very rare between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And a lot of other caves, including commercial caves like Wyandotte Cave in Indiana, have short seasons for the same reason, that the bat populations, because of various diseases like white-nose syndrome, the populations are in decline. So in order to keep the bats from being disturbed over the wintertime, they close the cave to all visitation. So the bats essentially can sleep without being interrupted. As a result, a cave like this, the temperature is about 54 degrees. The conditions in the cave are dry. If you came in this cave in middle of a blizzard, it'd be the same as it is right now, as far back as we are. So the weather in the cave, a cave like this, which is a dry cave, well above the water table, so this cave does not flood, is always the same 365 days a year. As a result, what we see in this cave will be features that are not typical for most caves that most visitors will see. We'll look at material that looks like the snowball dining room in Mammoth Cave. We'll see unusual gypsum crystals. So gypsum only forms in dry caves, caves where you don't have water dripping on the ceiling continuously. If you take the gypsum, like this white material on this boulder beside me, stick it in water, it'll slowly dissolve. And water and gypsum just don't go together, even though in fact water is actually in gypsum. It's part of the chemical structure. Gypsum is calcium sulfate plus water. And so the water gets released when you stick it in there, and the gypsum will literally just turn to mush, like plaster basically, like powdered plaster. So this particular passage we're in is dominated by breakdown. Breakdown is literally rock that has fallen off the ceiling. People wonder, if I go into a cave, am I going to get hit by a rock? Only if you raise your head up in a low passage, and then it's your fault, you've bumped your head. And that's the typical while we wear helmets in caves. The breakdown itself is very rare. Probably happens in a cave over decades. I'm talking about like a single rock falling. And then every couple hundred years, a larger rock will fall. And then every few thousand years, you'll have a really major collapse. So the odds of somebody being in a cave and even seeing a rock fall is almost infinitesimally small. And when people get hurt from rock falls, it's usually because they've bumped it and dislodged it, not because the rock just said, oh, look, there's a person down there, I'm going to fall and hit somebody. So most of the time, the accidents are actually, even if it's not intentional, which is why they're accidents, the rock will fall because you bumped up against it and jarred it loose. A cave like this is very expansive. I'm going to guess this passage behind me here, If we paced it, it'd probably be 30 feet wide and probably 20 or so feet tall. And in some of the holes in the floor, we've seen that it goes down about 12 or 15 feet. So the whole passage here is probably going to be close to 30 by 30 or 35 by 35 or something along those lines. So that's kind of the introduction to this cave, and now we'll take a look at some what B&O Cave in particular has to offer of geological interest and interest to speleologists, which are a fancy term for cave explorers. And we'll start looking around. Okay, so from a distance, here you have a large breakdown boulder that came from the ceiling some time ago, and it's covered with dust. It's covered with very, very old bat droppings, but it's more importantly for our purposes, it's covered this white, looks like snow almost. And this snow is actually gypsum, which grows literally out of the ground. In this case, it's out of the dirt and that the rock is sitting on. The calcium comes from the limestone. The sulfate or the sulfur comes from the earthy material, which has got probably decomposed pyrite and iron in it. And the sulfur and the calcium connect and they create gypsum. And as the crystal grows, I'm going to take my glove off here. I'm not going to touch it, but it actually, like a finger, it starts with a fingernail and works outward. The fingernail grows outward, and this grows outward as well. And as it grows outward, it tends to curl because of gravity and because of the molecular structure. So these things kind of form like little fingers and fists and lips and all sorts of weird shapes. Sometimes they'll go in a helix. Oh, that's fairly rare. Most of the time, they kind of radiate out from a common point. So if you look in a spot, you'll see a place where the gypsum kind of funnels to a point. In some cases, they kind of push themselves out and they actually form a circle. And we'll see examples of different patterns of this. But from a distance, this looks like just white fuzz on the rock. But when you get really close to it, you can actually see lots of individual, what we call ram's horn crystals. So this is one example. We're going to go over here next at the wall. So over my head, we have a gypsum that, again, is resembling little snowballs or puffy cumulus clouds. And here the gypsum is actually growing out of the limestone rock that is essentially the ceiling of the cave passage. Normally gypsum is going to be pure white, but you might notice there's some brown on some of this, and that's either from dirt impurities that are in the rock itself. It could be from where a bat hung on the gypsum and urinated basically and colored the rock that way. Most of the time, something like this, because it's pretty even all over the place, the coloration is not from a bat. It's just natural coloration. Pointing upward a little bit higher, we have calling it for descriptive purposes, like a gypsum bagel or a gypsum donut. It's just a ring of crystals that curl back on itself. So again, my fingers don't bend in that direction, thank goodness, but it's going in the other direction. Over here, we have a ledge of gypsum just following the wall, and this is peeling off. When it drops off, like right here, for example, it actually peeled off of here. Yes, it's possible that it could have been vandalization, but because this gate is gated and this looks like a recent fall, it's probably from just the weight of the gypsum. Finally, it grew large enough that it went foomp and dropped to the ground. But you notice it didn't break. It's white on this side, which means that this is the side that faced the bedrock. I'm not going to handle this one, but if we flipped it over, it would probably be kind of the grayish, yellowish color. And you can see right here, it's peeling off the wall right here. And so eventually, this will fall down just like that one did. And if we look around, I don't mind moving pieces like this. Here's pieces of gypsum that probably fell off some time ago, or that they actually formed on the surface on top of this dirt. But over the years, there's been enough foot traffic to break it down. Got more curls, more white snow-like stuff. Here's an example of where, I'm not going to touch it, but I want to use my finger a little bit easier, where the gypsum is just, millimeter thick. It's slowly peeling off. From my perspective, it actually looks like snow because it sparkles with the light here, just like snow does when you have sun on it as well. Step back here without falling. Now we got to point this there out. This is one of the highlights of this cave as far as I'm concerned. And so we have found one of the more interesting gypsum deposits in this cave. It's over a meter across, so it's a pretty good size area. And what we have here under this large breakdown boulder, which runs about, I'm going to guess 3 meters or about 12 feet, gypsum hair. And these are essentially needles of crystal. So instead of the curly ones we just saw previously, these are actually going really straight. They're colorless. So so if we picked up a single one, looked at it in a microscope, it'd be pretty much clear. But with our lighting, it looks kind of white. This cave has areas where you have small tufts of hair here and there, but this is one of the few places where it's a large mass of it, and as a result, it is really an unusual deposit in general. On the ground, when the crystals get long enough, they'll actually break off and accumulate. It looks a lot like fur from like a rabbit nest or something like that, except for the coloration. And right here, and I'm going to just again take my glove off and point so that you can see better. This is actually the ram's horn gypsum, but it's surrounded with the needles that have fallen off the rock above it. So again, this is a very unusual cave mineral formation, and gypsum forms in many different ways. And like the other crystals, the gypsum grows out from the base. Crystals that grow underwater tend to start and kind of almost grow a little bit differently. This start at the bottom and work out, whereas crystals underwater start at the top and continue upward. So the crystals are essentially pushing themselves away from the rock, as opposed to growing out from the rock. Above it, if we look above us, we will see just an enormous mass of thick gypsum that is the more typical gypsum. But again, in this cave, these curly crystals are growing extraordinarily large. There aren't a lot of caves in Kentucky that have gypsum this thick and highly developed, which is another reason why a cave like this is needs to be protected, because this stuff is really fragile. All it takes is like that, and you can break them off. Unlike soda straw stalactites and so forth, these will continue to grow if they get vandalized. But again, if you clear a spot like this, where where the crystals might just fall off, it might take hundreds of years for those crystals to grow back again, and in some cases even longer than that. So we're about 6 or 7 feet to about 2 meters from the previous location. This is a piece of a second breakdown boulder, and you'll notice it's totally covered with dirt, decomposing soil from the rocks and the ceiling and so forth. And right here in the middle of it is a gypsum flower, just kind of growing out of nowhere. If you look on this rock, nothing else like it. So whatever the cause, the gypsum just decided to grow right here, and it's again spreading out, growing from the base out, curling as it grows. And you can see why they call them flowers, or sometimes like gypsum roses or whatever, because they look like petals, the different crystals as they spread out. As we head over on this side, you'll see more of the crust, which is again more microscopic crystals. If you look above this particular formation, you'll see this more hairs and stuff, but they're not as well defined as they are over on that side. I'm also seeing right here, and it's really hard to see, but there's a little dark crust where the gypsum is actually deep brown, and with my light on it, it actually sparkles like it's made of glass, but yet it looks almost black. And then there's needles around it as well. So the gypsum here forms in lots of different shapes. And every time you turn and look in a different direction, you see something different and weird in its own way. So right over here, I'm just going to go pan a little bit more this direction, just a few feet. I'm going to kind of carefully step here. We have, again, more of these donut-shaped roses or pockets of gypsum. Crust sticking out here. Here's this place where it's spalling off. And it's eventually going to, and probably not very long, maybe if we came back in a year, this would be on the ground, or in a couple of years. But this will spall off again as the weight adds to the crystal. There's a piece in the back that fell off back here. And again, if you look at the rock, it looks from a distance, it looks like it's just mud spattered, blobby looking stuff. But as you get closer to it, you see that it's all gypsum, just covered with gypsum. And different styles of growth, different colors. So some of it's dark, some of it's light. So it really gives you a weird effect. So this area right in front of me, which thankfully is above my head, so I don't have to worry about ducking too much. Again, the cave texture has actually been covered by the gypsum. So imagine a piece of a birthday cake where you just slather on the icing and then try to imagine what the original shape of the birthday cake was because you've buried it in icing. Sometimes you have to look really close to see the details. So this looks like a ledge, a slab of rock that has dropped a little bit off, or maybe just weathering out a different rate from above it. But what I want to point out here is it is covered with beautiful radiating gypsum flowers. They're called ophiolites by geological term, but I'll stay with flowers. And there's like one here, one here, one here, one here. That's a real long one here, a large spray right over here. And they go all around. And they're most distinctive when they're not interconnected with each other, where you actually have a chance to kind of sprout like a flower, if you will, and get above the rest of them. From here, I'm going to kind of kneel, and we're going to go down to the wall back here. And I'm going to point out very large, very pronounced gypsum crystals here. Here's a piece where it has somehow or another either not grown or spalled off. The gypsum right here where my light is, if you can get closer view of it, you'll see that it's actually banded like tree rings. And I have found, when we'll probably find some examples of this as we go through here, when you have the clear gypsum growing, it actually, even one little curvy crystal, you'll see growth bands on it like tree rings. Whether that represents a year's growth or what, I don't know. No, I don't think anybody's ever studied them that much. Again, if we pan further over to the left, again, just very, very dense growth of the gypsum. And in fact, in the dirt back here, there's actually some needles. There's not very many of them, but there's one that's about as long as my pinky. So it's about 2.5 inches long, and more gypsum over here. And again, if you just pan on up, down, around, doesn't really matter. You're going to see gypsum everywhere. Here, this is an oddball. This is a rock pendant, piece of possibly chert, maybe water-worn limestone, and it's sticking up right there, and gypsum all around it. So it's possible at one point that this pendant would have had gypsum over it, but maybe not. Here's a spray of gypsum right here, and there's actually a chunk of rock on top of it, which is probably just a piece of limestone. I can't tell whether it doesn't look like it's recently fallen, so I think it's there. It's just sitting there because it's got a little bit of dusting on it. In the background, I'm going to have to just point at it because it's too far away, but right there looks like a natural arch, a finger of gypsum just covering up and curling over. So that's, again, one single crystal. So the closer you look, the more you see, the more it's amazing. Just phenomenal stuff here. And this is one small stretch of a cave passage that's got this for hundreds of feet. It's not always this dense, but it comes in waves. There's areas where there's just an amazing amount of gypsum. Going down that way, it's just phenomenal.